Hi, my name is Catherine McNulty. Welcome back to another grief-inspired video. I'm really excited about Grief Inspired because I wanted to be able to talk to you one-on-one and give you the information and the knowledge that you need and can use to really help you move through the grief process and hopefully ease the pain that you're feeling. And part of what I also do is offer practical tools and strategies that you can use to keep you moving forward so that you don't get stuck in your grief. I talk all the time about how I was really stuck for 2 full years, and I certainly don't want that for you. So the topic for today is to talk about guilt and grief. And if you're grieving, I'm sure you're experiencing some guilt. I don't know of anybody that I've spoken with who didn't have at least some guilt about things that did happen, things that didn't happen, when their loved one was passing on. And so when we talk about guilt, there's a lot of other emotions that come up with it. So typically things like guilt and shame, blame, self-judgment, anger, all these emotions can be intertwined and can really leave you confusing. But I just don't think that there's anything that's more crippling than feeling guilty about what has happened. And as a mother who went into preterm labor, and ultimately that preterm labor was really the reason why my son didn't survive, I have a lot of guilt, or I did have a lot of guilt. And it just comes with part of the process, because I thought to myself, what if I had done something differently? What if I had put my feet up more? What if I had eaten different things or taken better care of myself? What if I had, gone to the doctor sooner when I felt like something was happening? There's so many things. And part of that for me was really, really, overwhelming at times. And I've always sort of been one to, I tend to judge myself very critically. And so that was something that I personally really had to work through as part of my own grief process. And I mentioned all the other emotions that come up with it, things like blame. When you blame someone else or you blame yourself, because that's, like I did. What that is I follow the work of Brene Brown, and she's one of my favorite people. And I would love it if she were to watch this video. So hi, Brene. But really what she talks about with blame is that blame is the discharging of pain. And that when you blame yourself or you blame someone else, it's because you have all of this pain and you don't know where to put it. And so we try to put blame onto someone or something, and sometimes that's ourselves. And what's interesting that she also says in her research is that it's inversely proportional or relational to accountability, meaning that if you're blaming someone else or you're blaming yourself, it's not necessarily taking accountability for what is, what you can control and what you can't control. So I put together, I've written blog pieces on this, and I talk about it all the time with my clients. But what I did was I put together 4 steps to help you get to a point where you can start to release your guilt. So step 1. Start with forgiveness. Now, if you're feeling guilty, if you're blaming yourself or someone else for things that happen, start with forgiveness. Forgive yourself for what you did do. Forgive yourself for what you didn't do. Forgive yourself for what you think you should have done. If someone else didn't do or did do something, forgive them. Keep in mind that everybody does the best they can in the moment that they have. I always say hindsight's 20/20. It's easy to look back and say, well, I should have done this or I should have done that. I should have gone to the doctor sooner. But you do the best you can, and you did the best you can in the moment that you had. So start with forgiveness. That's step number one. Step number two is to really explore what you're feeling. So if you're feeling guilty, well, what are you really feeling guilty about? Is there something really there? Is there something that you really need to process and you need to really work through, because you do feel very accountable, and you need to process? Is there someone else that you blame, and that you're really putting the blame on them when maybe it's not necessarily, they don't necessarily deserve it. But we oftentimes want to put blame on someone. Especially if we don't want to take the blame ourselves, we'll put it on somebody else. That's a normal human reaction. But explore that and see, are you doing that? And, where is the guilt coming from? And if you don't know, that's fine. Just keep exploring it. But I think understanding where the grief or where the guilt is really coming from, or the shame, or the self-judgment, the blaming, just look into it and see what you can find, because looking at it is really going to be helpful. And step three, I think, is really important. And again, this is something that, I need to remind myself all the time. And that is acknowledge that you're imperfect. Acknowledge that no one is perfect in any situation, in any scenario. But sometimes we hold ourselves really up to lofty standards, and we expect ourselves to be perfect. And so, if you made a mistake, if there was something that you did, forgive yourself, and acknowledge that you're imperfect. And maybe you did the best that you could with the time that you were, with the situation that you were giving. These typical life and death situations can be really, really overwhelming. And so, you're asked to make split second decisions, which I can't even say because this is how you get. Those decisions, you just do the best you can. And sometimes there are no good decisions. And so recognize that and tell yourself that you did the best that you could in the time that you were given. Acknowledge that you're not perfect, and neither is anyone else. It's just the reality. So step four, the fourth step, is really to practice. You really have to practice looking at your guilt, forgiving yourself, exploring your feelings, acknowledging that you're imperfect. And it is a practice, and you need to remind yourself. So when you start feeling really guilty, or starting to blame someone else, or feeling like you're putting a lot of self-judgment on yourself, think about that and tell yourself, I am imperfect. Everyone's imperfect. I need to forgive to myself, and I'm going to release the guilt. I'm going to let it go, because honestly, the guilt is not going to bring back your loved one. And I know that sometimes when we think about guilt, what if I did this? What if I did that? Would they still be here? Well, the reality is maybe, but maybe not. And there may not be any way to know. So again, practice forgiving yourself. Practice saying, I am imperfect. I forgive myself. I want to release this guilt, because the guilt can fester inside of you, and it can really do a lot of damage. And I don't want that for you. And if guilt becomes so overwhelming that you don't know what to do, then I want to acknowledge it and request that you find somebody to support you in that, whether that be me or someone else. Find a therapist, find a friend, but you need to work through it. It will eat you up from the inside if you don't. And it's not an easy process, but I think it's a really important one to consider. So I hope that helped you with your grief. If you're experiencing a lot of guilt or shame or blame, just put, I am too. I am too. Right? You don't have to say what you're shameful about, but just comment so that we can all know that we are not alone. That guilt is a very, very common part of grief, and it's challenging. And as always, my mission at Grief Inspired is to make sure that you know that you're not alone, to let you know that there is hope, that you're going to be able to get through your grief. And I promise that I will be here with you every step of the way. So if there's anything that I can do for you, if there's a video you want to see, please let me know. Put comments below. Subscribe to my channel to get more videos. And blessings to you until the next time we talk.